Dear friends, welcome to our channel. We are very happy to share with you different stories about love and betrayal from around the world. So now, let's begin our story journey today. Frank stood at the door of his factory's break room, watching the cheerful and noisy scene before him. Yet his heart felt as if it had fallen into an icy abyss. This was the 45th birthday party he had meticulously prepared for Mary, inviting all her friends and their mutual acquaintances. The break room had been decorated with a completely new look, with blue and silver balloons adorning the ceiling. Long tables were filled with exquisite food and drinks, and he had even hired a professional bartender to mix cocktails for the guests. In the corner, the birthday gift he had specially prepared for Mary, a diamond necklace she had been longing for, lay quietly in a red velvet box, waiting for the moment of revelation. But just 5 minutes ago, when Mary was giving her thank you speech on the impromptu small stage, everything collapsed. "I want to especially thank Tony," Mary said, holding a glass of champagne. But her gaze was not directed at her husband, but rather at the well-dressed man in the corner. "Thank you for your support and understanding over the past days, helping me rediscover my self-worth. Many times, you understand what true care is better than certain people." The room fell silent for a moment, the atmosphere becoming subtle. Frank felt a sharp pain in his chest. He recognized that Tony, the factory's union representative, a smooth-talking guy. It was rumored that he always managed to obtain unreasonable benefits for workers in negotiations, while mysteriously improving his own quality of life. However, what shocked Frank even more was what happened next. Mary walked toward him with a strange smile on her face and pulled out a wrapped gift box from behind her. "Darling, this is a special gift for you. I think you'll like it." Under everyone's gaze, Frank opened the box, and inside was a black t-shirt with large white letters on the front that read, "Divorced." The room suddenly erupted in laughter. Some of Mary's close friends were laughing uncontrollably, and someone even whistled. Frank felt dizzy, as if he had been publicly slapped. He looked at Mary. There was no remorse in her eyes, only a kind of liberating defiance. Frank didn't say a word, threw the t-shirt on the ground, turned around, and walked towards the corner where the gifts were placed. He picked up the red velvet box and left the break room. The laughter coming from behind was like demons' whispers, hurting every inch of his nerves. 17 years of marriage ended like this, with a public humiliation. Walking out of the factory gates, Frank sat in his car, his hands trembling with anger as he gripped the steering wheel. Countless images flashed through his mind. Mary's shy smile when they first met, her tireless support when he started his business, the difficult times they went through together, and the increasingly frequent arguments and cold wars in recent times. Mary had once worked as a clerk in the factory, and it was there that they met and fell in love. At that time, Frank was just an ordinary worker with big dreams, and Mary was the sunshine girl in everyone's eyes. Countless nights, they planned the future together, outlining dreams. When Frank decided to start his own factory, it was Mary who was always by his side, encouraging him, helping him organize documents, and even using her own savings to support him. However, as the factory gradually grew in size, Frank did indeed invest more time and energy. But contrary to Mary's later accusations, he did not completely neglect the family. He remembered how he struggled to squeeze time out of his busy work schedule to attend Mary's birthday gatherings. How he spent weekends accompanying her to places she liked as much as possible. How he carefully prepared surprises on every wedding anniversary. He admitted that he was not someone who expressed emotions well, but he always believed that actions spoke louder than words. 3 months ago, Frank noticed that Mary's behavior had become unusual. She began to go out frequently, claiming to attend various social activities. Her phone never left her side, and she was always changing her unlock password. Her enthusiasm for family affairs noticeably declined, and she often seemed distracted. Most abnormally, she began to pay special attention to her appearance, buying many new clothes, and even going for expensive beauty treatments. As a businessman, Frank knew how to observe details and draw conclusions. He hired a private investigator and soon got confirmation Mary was having a secret affair with Tony. Those so-called social activities were nothing more than dates in upscale restaurants or hotel suites with Tony. What broke Frank's heart the most were the photographs provided by the investigator. Mary and Tony whispering in a restaurant, the intimacy and love in their eyes so obvious. That same look had once been reserved only for him. Frank wanted to confront her immediately, but his pride and years of business wisdom made him decide to take more cautious actions. He needed to know more, needed to know how long this affair had been going on, why Mary had been attracted to Tony, and whether Mary had really betrayed him as he suspected, not just emotionally. In the following 2 months, Frank pretended to know nothing while secretly collecting various information about Mary and Tony. He learned from internal factory employees that Tony, as a union representative, appeared to fight for workers' rights on the surface. But in reality, he was secretly colluding with management, accepting bribes, and sacrificing workers' long-term interests for short-term small gains. Frank also discovered that Tony had obviously used his knowledge of factory operations to specifically approach Mary, leading her step by step down the wrong path. He only cares about that damn factory. Frank accidentally overheard Mary complaining to a friend on the phone. 17 years, and he has never truly cared about my feelings. Tony at least listens to me, cares about my thoughts and needs. When I'm with him, I feel valued, not just a family accessory. These words were like blades, deeply piercing Frank's heart. Although he had indeed invested a lot of time and work, he had never viewed Mary as an accessory. He had created a comfortable living environment for her, respected her decision to no longer work, and encouraged her to develop her own interests and hobbies. He had purchased high-end properties, specifically designed a garden for her in the backyard, and even supported the opening of a small art studio, all things she had expressed interest in the past. But apparently, all of this in Mary's eyes couldn't compare to Tony's sweet words and carefully designed attention. A week before the party, Frank made a decision. He would hold a grand birthday party for Mary, also as one last chance for her. If she didn't cherish this opportunity, he would make her infidelity and betrayal public, while implementing his carefully planned revenge plan. He knew this approach might be somewhat cruel, but for someone who viewed loyalty as life itself, betrayal was an unforgivable crime. For those who sought to gain benefits through intimate relationships, they had to pay the price. Now, sitting in his car, Frank picked up his phone and dialed a number. "James, it's me. Execute the plan," he said briefly, then hung up. James was the factory's security team leader, a loyal old subordinate who had followed Frank since the early days of his business. Next, Frank sent a message to several key foremen. Tony may have betrayed the workers' interests. There is internal evidence indicating he took bribes from management in the recent wage negotiations. I am investigating. Please keep this confidential for now, but be vigilant. Putting down the phone, Frank took a deep breath and started the car. He knew that in the next few minutes, a storm would erupt behind him, and he was driving towards the center of that storm. Meanwhile, in the factory's break room, the party atmosphere had already shifted from joy to confusion. Mary looked at her husband's departing figure, the defiant smile still on her face, but a glimmer of uncertainty flashed in her eyes. She had originally expected Frank to explode on the spot, even anticipated a thorough confrontation, but his silent departure left her somewhat unprepared. "He'll be fine." Her close friend Linda walked over and patted her shoulder. "Men, need time to digest. Besides, your relationship has long been dead in all but name, hasn't it? At least now you can be free." Mary forced a smile, but her eyes involuntarily searched for Tony's figure. Tony was standing in the corner, chatting with several coworkers, looking relaxed and at ease. Sensing Mary's gaze, he nodded slightly, with a confident smile at the corner of his mouth. Just then, the doors of the break room were pushed open, and 5 security guards walked in, heading straight for Tony. "Mr. Tony," Security Chief James said expressionlessly, "we have received anonymous reports accusing you of theft of company property and abuse of power. Please come with us to the security office to assist with the investigation." The venue immediately erupted in commotion. Tony's face instantly turned pale, but he quickly adjusted his expression, showing an innocent and angry demeanor. "This is absurd," he protested loudly. "I am the union representative. This is clearly suppression against the union. Everyone can see. This is management's retaliation." Several workers began to echo his sentiments, and the scene became chaotic for a moment. James, seeing the situation, took out a document from his pocket. "We have evidence indicating that over the past 6 months, you may have used your position to accept bribes, affecting wage negotiation results, he said loudly, his voice enough to cover the noise. This is not aimed at the union, but at individuals who may have betrayed the workers' interests. If you are innocent, the investigation will clear your name. These words weakened the voices supporting Tony. Workers began to look at each other, whispering. Tony, seeing the unfavorable situation, had no choice but to follow the security guards out. But before leaving, he gave Mary a meaningful look, his gaze firm, as if silently conveying some kind of message. Mary felt a wave of panic, but also a hint of annoyance. She quickly walked toward James, trying to stop him. James, what's going on? Where's Frank? He can't detain Tony without reason. James looked at her calmly, with no sympathy in his eyes. Mr. Frank is dealing with more important matters. As for Mr. Gallo, we do have evidence. If you have any questions, you can discuss them after the investigation is completed. Mary realized she couldn't stop this and immediately took out her phone, dialing Frank's number, but the call went straight to voicemail. She tried several more times, with the same result. Anxiety and anger intertwined, and she began to dial constantly, while sending one message after another to Frank. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the factory was becoming increasingly tense. Some workers had received messages about Tony's possible betrayal of workers' interests, and anger was rapidly spreading. More people began to call Frank, hoping to get a direct explanation. Mary's phone was also constantly ringing. It was her friends asking what had happened, and some of Tony's supporters demanding her to intervene. In the short span of 5 minutes, Frank's phone showed 155 missed calls, most from Mary, the rest from factory employees, Tony's supporters, and even Tony himself. Mary stood in the center of the break room, looking at the decorations that were originally meant to celebrate her birthday. Her heart was mixed with irritation, anxiety, and a hint of unease. She had wanted to use today's party to publicly reveal her marital crisis with Frank, laying the groundwork for the upcoming divorce. But she hadn't expected Frank to take the initiative first and in such an intense manner. Mary, are you okay? Linda walked over and asked with concern. He's taken Tony away, Mary said through gritted teeth. Frank probably already knows about us. So what? Linda shrugged. Your marriage is over anyway. You've had enough of being the neglected wife, haven't you? Mary didn't answer. She recalled the recent months with Tony. It started as work contact, then gradually developed into personal involvement. Tony knew how to listen, how to make a woman feel valued, which was something Frank had never given her. At least, that's what she thought. But now, seeing Frank's reaction, she suddenly realized that perhaps she had never truly understood her husband. Would a person who only cared about work prepare such a grand party for her birthday? Would an emotionally indifferent person be so angry after discovering betrayal? Mary shook her head, clearing these thoughts. No, she wouldn't be swayed by guilt. Her marriage to Frank had long been in name only. She had simply found her own happiness, and Frank's reaction was merely a manifestation of wounded male pride. I need to help Tony, she finally told Linda. Frank might use his power to do something excessive. Linda looked at her, a flash of doubt passing through her eyes, but finally nodded. Do you want me to go with you? No need. Mary picked up her bag. I'll go find Frank myself. He must be in his office or has gone home. Mary left the break room, the party completely over. What she didn't know was that this night not only marked the end of her marriage, but also the beginning of a complete change in her life's trajectory. Frank drove into a suburban villa, a leisure residence he had bought a few years ago but rarely used. Tonight, it would become his temporary refuge. Just after closing the door, his phone began to vibrate frantically again. The screen displayed countless calls and messages from Mary, factory employees, and even Tony himself. One message in particular caught his attention, from Mary. Where are you? We need to talk. Tony is innocent. You can't treat him like this. Frank laughed coldly, set his phone to silent, and threw it on the sofa. He walked to the bar cabinet, poured himself a glass of whiskey, then sat by the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing at the distant city lights. 17 years of marriage ended like this. Frank wasn't unaware of the problems in the marriage, but he had always thought Mary understood his struggles and sacrifices. The factory was their shared dream, the result of their joint efforts. At least, he had always believed so. Even during his busiest periods, Frank had never forgotten to care for Mary's needs. He remembered preparing gifts before each business trip, Remembered that Mary liked gardening, so he created a small garden for her in the backyard. Remembered she had mentioned wanting to learn painting in the past, so he sent her to professional courses and prepared an art studio for her at home. But clearly, none of this was what Mary really needed. Or rather, Tony gave her something Frank had never given. Perhaps some kind of emotional fulfillment, or perhaps just the excitement of an affair. Whatever the case, she chose to betray, and chose the most humiliating way to make this betrayal public. Frank's phone lit up again. This time it was a message from James. Have contained Tony in the security office as planned. Factory atmosphere tense. Multiple workers demanding explanation. Mary tried to contact Tony, but was prevented. She has left the factory, possibly heading to your residence. Frank quickly replied. Maintain status quo. Ensure no physical harm. Prepare the evidence we have about Tony's bribe taking. Call an emergency union meeting tomorrow morning. Putting down the phone, Frank poured another glass. He knew his actions might seem drastic, but years of struggle in the business world had taught him that sometimes iron-handed methods were necessary to deal with betrayal. This was not just about personal dignity, but also about the future of the entire factory. Tony, as a union representative, should have fought for workers' interests, but secretly accepted bribes from management, influencing negotiation outcomes. This was no longer just a matter of personal morality, but had crossed legal boundaries. And Mary, as his wife, not only betrayed her marriage vows, but chose such a humiliating way to make this betrayal public, which left Frank feeling doubly struck. Just as he was deep in thought, the doorbell rang. Through the security monitor, he saw Mary standing outside, looking anxious and angry. Frank hesitated for a moment, finally deciding to face this inevitable confrontation. Why did you do this? Mary questioned as soon as she entered, her voice trembling with anger. Do you know Tony has been detained by your men? This is completely illegal. Frank looked at her calmly, feeling a surge of bitterness in his heart. This woman, once the most important person in his life, was now loudly questioning him for another man. Why did I do this? He asked in return, his voice low and steady. At the birthday party I prepared for you, you publicly thanked your lover and gave me a divorced t-shirt. Do you really have the nerve to ask me why I did this? Mary was stunned, her face turning pale. You already knew? Of course I knew, Frank said quietly. I've known for 3 months. Every time you lied about going to social activities, every time you secretly met him in restaurants, every time you stayed overnight in hotels, I knew. Mary's eyes flashed with panic, but it was quickly replaced by anger. Then why didn't you say something earlier? Why wait until today? Why involve Tony's job? Frank shook his head, incredulous at her reaction. You betrayed me, humiliated me at the party, and now you're worried about your lover? How interesting. As for Tony, his problem isn't just being involved with you. He used his position as union representative to accept bribes, betraying workers' interests. That is a fact, unrelated to you. I don't believe it, Mary stubbornly said. Tony isn't that kind of person. He really cares about the workers, cares about me. Unlike you, who only cares about your factory and profits. Frank felt a wave of weariness. Do you really know him, Mary? Or have you just been blinded by his carefully designed attention? He approached you with a purpose, just as everything he does has a purpose. Mary shook her head, refusing to accept this claim. You don't know him, just as you never knew me. In these 17 years, how many times have you truly listened to my thoughts and feelings? You were always busy with work, expanding your empire, and I was just a piece in your life, the image of a proper wife. Frank took a deep breath, controlling his emotions. I admit I'm not someone who expresses emotions well, but I never viewed you as a piece. I created a comfortable life for you, respected your choices, supported your interests. If you were dissatisfied, why didn't you tell me directly? Why choose betrayal? I tried. Mary suddenly raised her voice. But you never listened. Every time I tried to talk to you heart to heart, you either casually dismissed it or compensated with material conditions. You think giving me gifts or building me a garden is caring. What I needed was a real emotional connection, a feeling of being understood and valued. These words made Frank fall silent. Perhaps Mary was right. Perhaps he did indeed have deficiencies in emotional expression. But this still couldn't be an excuse for betrayal. Anyway, he finally said calmly, our marriage is over. I will contact a lawyer to handle the divorce matters. As for Tony, His issue will be dealt with by the company and possible legal procedures. Mary looked at him, the fire in her eyes gradually being replaced by a complex emotion. Are you really so decisive? You ended it, Mary. Frank looked directly into her eyes. The moment you decided to betray, the moment you decided to publicly humiliate me. I can forgive many things, but betrayal isn't among them. Mary stood there, momentarily not knowing what to say. Finally, she just nodded and turned towards the door. You'll regret it, Frank. When you realize what you've lost, it will be too late. Frank didn't answer, just watched her leave. When the door closed, he felt a strange sense of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. No matter what lay ahead, at least now, he didn't have to live in deception and pretense. The next morning, Frank returned to the factory early. As expected, the factory was in complete chaos. The workers had divided into several factions, one firmly supporting Tony, believing he had been framed by management, another questioning Tony's behavior, demanding a thorough investigation, and a third remaining neutral, waiting for further developments. Frank headed directly to the conference room, where the main members of the union and factory management had already gathered. When Frank walked in, the room immediately fell silent. I know everyone has many questions, Frank said, getting straight to the point. About what happened last night, I owe you all an explanation. But first, I want to clarify one point. This is not an action against the union, but against an individual who may have betrayed the workers' trust. He gestured to James to distribute a document detailing how Tony had secretly accepted bribes from certain management members during negotiations over the past 6 months. In exchange, he had conceded on certain terms. More shockingly, the document also included evidence that Tony may have misappropriated union funds. These are preliminary investigation results, Frank continued. I have contacted the relevant authorities who will conduct a formal investigation. In the meantime, I suggest suspending Tony from his position as union representative, with his deputy taking over his responsibilities. At the same time, I apologize to all employees who were affected by my personal marital issues. There was an uproar in the conference room. Most union members, after reading the document, had expressions of shock and anger on their faces. Tony had always portrayed himself as a defender of workers' interests, but in reality, he had been secretly betraying their trust. Just then, the doors of the conference room were pushed open, and Tony walked in accompanied by 2 security guards. He looked exhausted, but his gaze remained firm, even defiant. All of this is fabricated, he shouted, waving the document that had just been distributed. Mr. Frank is framing me for personal grudges. This is completely a retaliatory act. People in the room looked at each other, not knowing whom to believe. Frank didn't directly respond to Tony's accusations, but took out a USB drive from his briefcase and inserted it into the projector in the conference room. This is the original material of the evidence I've collected, he said calmly. It includes videos of Tony's secret meetings with certain management members, abnormal records of union fund flows, and suspicious deposits to his personal account. I understand everyone's doubts, so I'm prepared to make all evidence public for you to judge for yourselves. As the evidence was displayed, Tony's expression became increasingly uncomfortable. When the video showed Tony accepting an envelope in a secluded restaurant, the atmosphere in the conference room became tense. This means nothing, Tony tried to explain. That was just a personal loan from a friend. But when Frank showed records of regular deposits to Tony's personal account, which perfectly coincided with the time after key negotiations, even Tony's most steadfast supporters began to waver. We can continue to argue, Frank finally said. But the facts are there. I have submitted these evidences to the relevant authorities who will conduct a fair investigation. In the meantime, I ask everyone to stay calm and not let this matter affect the normal operation of the factory. After the meeting, most workers chose to believe the evidence presented by Frank. Tony was suspended from his position pending further investigation, and Frank, through his handling of this crisis, established an even more solid foundation of trust among the workers. Meanwhile, Mary found herself in a difficult situation. On one hand, she still believed Tony had been framed. On the other hand, the evidence presented by Frank was indeed difficult to ignore. What troubled her more was that, since their confrontation that night, Tony's attitude towards her had noticeably cooled. A week later, Mary met with Tony at a cafe, hoping to learn more about the situation. But to her disappointment, Tony seemed more concerned about his own predicament rather than their relationship. "I need a good lawyer," he kept repeating. "Frank obviously planned this for a long time. I have to prepare to respond." When Mary mentioned their future, Tony's reaction made her even more chilled. "It's too early to talk about that," he evaded. "I have to solve these problems first, then we can discuss other things." When Mary left the cafe, she felt a sense of being used. Perhaps Frank was right. Perhaps Tony had approached her with ulterior motives. But she quickly shook her head, denying this thought. No, she couldn't let Frank's words affect her judgment. Tony was just under a lot of pressure right now. Once things settled down, everything would improve. However, things didn't turn out as Mary wished. As the investigation deepened, more of Tony's misconduct was revealed. He had not only accepted bribes, but also used his union position for personal gain, and might even be involved in money laundering activities. The local district attorney's office had already begun a preliminary investigation into him. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings between Frank and Mary were officially initiated. Contrary to Mary's expectations, Frank showed considerable generosity in property division, voluntarily offering to let her keep their shared property and providing a reasonable living allowance. But there was one point on which he absolutely wouldn't yield. He refused any of Mary's claims to the factory shares. "The factory was created by me," he clearly stated through his lawyer. Although Mary certainly contributed in the early days, this is not enough for her to gain equity. "I am willing to provide other forms of compensation, but the factory is not up for discussion." Mary felt angry and unsatisfied with this. In her view, the factory equally carried her blood and sweat. If it hadn't been for her early support and encouragement, Frank might never have realized his entrepreneurial dream. So she hired an aggressive lawyer, determined to fight for more benefits for herself. "We can prove your contribution to the factory," the lawyer confidently told her. "Even if you didn't directly participate in the management later, your support and sacrifice as a wife equally deserve recognition." However, reality turned out to be much crueler than Mary imagined. Frank's legal team presented detailed financial records, proving that the main development and expansion of the factory occurred after Mary stopped working and began to focus on family life. More decisively, Frank provided evidence of Mary's improper relationship with Tony, as well as clues that Tony might have used this relationship to obtain internal company information. These evidences indicate that Mrs. Mary not only betrayed her marriage vows, but might also be involved in activities harmful to company interests, Frank's chief lawyer stated in court. Although we have no direct evidence that she leaked business secrets, her maintenance of an intimate relationship with someone who has been confirmed to accept bribes and use his position for personal gain itself constitutes a serious conflict of interest. This statement seriously weakened Mary's position. In the end, she received a property division far lower than expected and completely lost any claim to the factory. After the divorce proceedings were completed, Mary's life quickly fell into difficulties. Without Frank's economic support, she had to look for work to maintain herself. But due to her long time away from the workplace, plus the sensation caused by the divorce case locally, she found it difficult to find a suitable position. Finally, she had to accept a poorly paid job as an administrative assistant, move out of the mansion, and rent a rather ordinary apartment in the city. Meanwhile, Tony's situation was even worse. Facing multiple charges and irrefutable evidence, he finally pleaded guilty, being sentenced to 2 years in prison and fined a substantial amount. What shocked Mary even more was that during the trial, Tony, in order to reduce his sentence, not only admitted his misconduct, but also publicly stated that it was Mary who first approached him, hoping to obtain internal company information through him. "I admit my behavior was inappropriate," Tony said in court. "But Mrs. Mary equally used me. She knew my position was special, that I could access core company information, so she deliberately approached me, inducing me to cross boundaries." These words were like a thunderbolt on a clear day, completely destroying Mary's last dignity. She had not only lost her marriage and economic security, but also her social circle and reputation. Former friends began to distance themselves from her. Even her closest friend, Linda, started to keep her distance. "I'm not saying you did anything wrong," Linda subtly expressed after an awkward lunch. "But the situation now is a bit complicated My husband still works at Frank's company." 3 years later, the factory continued to grow and expand under Frank's leadership, beginning to expand into international markets. In return, he increased employee benefits, establishing an employee stock ownership plan, allowing workers to share in the fruits of the company's growth. This move won widespread acclaim from employees and also brought the factory's cohesion to an unprecedented level. In his personal life, Frank remained single. Although many women expressed interest in this successful entrepreneur, he always maintained distance. The shadow of betrayal still covered him, making it difficult for him to fully commit to a relationship again. However, this didn't mean his life was boring. On the contrary, he began to participate more in community activities, supporting local education and charitable works, even founding a foundation to help young people with entrepreneurial dreams. "You should consider starting over," his old friend Mike often advised. "It's been 3 years. It's time to let go of the past." But Frank always shook his head with a smile. "I'm fine, really. My life now is very fulfilling. I don't need to force myself to meet the so-called normal standards." Mary's life was completely different. The divorce and Tony's betrayal led her into a period of deep self-doubt and depression. But gradually, she began to reflect on her choices and behaviors. She realized that, although Frank certainly had deficiencies in emotional expression, she chose betrayal rather than communication, deceit rather than honesty, which was equally wrong. To stand up again, Mary began to receive psychological counseling, striving to rebuild her life. She found a relatively stable job, starting as an administrative manager at a small design company. Although the salary was far from what she used to have, at least she could maintain a basic life. She also picked up her hobby of painting again, something she had wanted to try during her marriage but never persisted with. 5 years later, one day, Frank was driving through the city center and accidentally saw Mary coming out of an art gallery. She was thinner than in his memory, but looked in good color. For a moment, memories of the past came flooding back like a tide, but were quickly suppressed by firm rationality. Frank didn't stop, just continued driving, looking forward. That marriage had completely become the past, for better or worse. It was now just part of life's experience. As for Tony, he completely disappeared from public view after serving his sentence. It was rumored that he had moved to a small town in the South, working in a car repair shop, leading a low-key life. He had tried to contact Mary, hoping to re-establish contact, but Mary refused. "I have already paid for my mistakes," she wrote in her rejection message. "I don't need to make the same mistake again." Life is like a mirror. It faithfully reflects our choices and behaviors. Frank chose honesty and upholding principles. Though he lost his marriage, he won respect and career success. Mary chose betrayal. Though she experienced a painful price, she finally began self-reflection and rebuilding. And Tony chose deception and exploitation, ultimately losing everything, including his freedom and dignity. In this game with no true winners, each learned valuable lessons from their own choices. Perhaps this is the cruelest and fairest aspect of life. We reap what we sow. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating content. See you in our next story.